Chapter 18. The current song at that time was Roy Hamilton singing "Everybody's Got a Home But Me." I kept singing that as I swung along. On the other side of Riverside, I got on the highway and got a ride right away from a young couple to an airfield 5 miles out of town, and from there a ride from a quiet man almost to Beaumont, California, but 5 miles short of it on a double-lane speed highway with nobody likely to stop. So I hiked on in beautiful, sparkling air. At Beaumont, I ate hot dogs, hamburgers, and a bag of fries, and added a big strawberry shake, all among giggling high school children. Then, on the other side of town, I got a ride from a Mexican called Jaime, who said he was the son of the governor of the state of Baja California, Mexico, which I didn't believe and was a wino and had me buy him wine, which he only threw up out the window as he drove. A droopy, sad, helpless young man. Very sad eyes, very nice, a bit nutty. He was driving clear to Mexicali, a little off my route, but good enough and far enough out toward Arizona to suit me. At Calexico, it was Christmas shopping time on Main Street with incredible, perfect, astonished Mexican beauties who kept getting so much better that when the first ones had repassed, they'd already become capped and thin in my mind. I was standing there looking every which way, eating an ice cream cone, waiting for Jaime, who said he had an errand and would pick me up again and take me personally into Mexicali, Mexico, to meet his friends. My plan was to have a nice cheap supper in Mexico and then roll on that night. Jaime didn't show up, of course. I crossed the border by myself and turned sharp right at the gate to avoid the Hawker Street, and went immediately to relieve myself of water in construction dirt. But a crazy Mexican watchman with an official uniform thought it was a big infringement, and said something, and when I said I didn't know, no sé, he said, "No sabes police?" The nerve of him to call the cops because I peed on his dirt ground. But I did notice afterward, and felt sad, that I had watered the spot where he sat to light a small fire nights, because there were wood coals piled. So I moved up the muddy street feeling meek and truly sorry, with the big pack on my back, as he stared after me with his doleful stare. I came to a hill and saw great mud-flat river bottoms with stinks and tarns and awful paths with women and burros ambling in the dusk. An old Chinese-Mexican beggar caught my eye and we stopped to chat. When I told him I might go dormiendo sleep in those flats, I was really thinking of a little beyond the flats in the foothills. He looked horrified, and being a deaf-mute, he demonstrated that I would be robbed of my pack and killed if I tried it, which I suddenly realized was true. I wasn't in America anymore. Either side of the border, either way you slice the bologna, a homeless man was in hot water. Where would I find a quiet grove to meditate in, to live in forever? After the old man tried to tell me his life story by signs, I walked away waving and smiling, and crossed the flats and narrow board bridge over the yellow water and over to the poor adobe district of Mexicali, where the Mexico gaiety as ever charmed me. And I ate a delicious tin bowl of garbanzo soup with pieces of cabeza, head, and cebolla, onion, raw, having cashed a quarter at the border gate for 3 paper pesos and a big pile of huge pennies. While eating at the little mud street counter, I dug the street, the people, the poor bitch dogs, the cantinas, the whores, the music, men goofing in the narrow road wrestling, and across the street an unforgettable beauty parlor, Salon de Belleza, with a bare mirror on a bare wall and bare chairs and one little 17-year-old beauty with her hair in pins dreaming at the mirror, but an old plaster bust with periwig beside her, and a big man with a mustache in a Scandinavian ski sweater picking his teeth behind, and a little boy at the next mirror chair eating a banana, and out on the sidewalk some little children gathered like before a movie house. And I thought, oh, all Mexicali on some Saturday afternoon. Thank you, O Lord, for returning me my zest for life, for thy ever-recurring forms and thy womb of exuberant fertility. All my tears weren't in vain. It'll all work out, finally. Then, strolling, I bought a hot donut stick, then 2 oranges from a girl, and recrossed the bridge in dusk of evening and headed for the border gate happy. But here I was stopped by 3 unpleasant American guards, and my whole rucksack was searched sullenly. "What did you buy in Mexico?" "Nothing." They didn't believe me. They fished around. After fingering my wraps of leftover French fries from Beaumont and raisins and peanuts and carrots, and cans of pork and beans I made sure to have for the road, and half-loaves of whole wheat bread, they got disgusted and let me go. It was funny, really. They were expecting a rucksack full of opium from Sinaloa, no doubt, or weed from Mazatlan, or heroin from Panama. Maybe they thought I'd walked all the way from Panama. They couldn't figure me out. I went to the Greyhound bus station and bought a short ticket to El Centro and the main highway. I figured I'd catch the Arizona Midnight Ghost and be in Yuma that same night and sleep in the Colorado River bottom, which I'd noticed long ago. But it wound up in El Centro. I went to the yards and angled around and finally talked to a conductor passing the sign to a switch engine. "Where's the zipper?" "It don't come through El Centro." I was surprised at my stupidity. "Only freight you can catch goes through Mexico, then Yuma, but they'll find you and kick you out and you'll wind up in a Mexican calaboose, boy." I've had enough of Mexico. Thanks. So I went to the big intersection in town with the cars turning for the eastward run to Yuma and started thumbing. I had no luck for an hour. Suddenly a big truck pulled up to the side. The driver got out and fiddled with his suitcase. "You going on east?" I asked. "Soon as I spend a little time in Mexicali. You know anything about Mexico?" "Lived there for years." He looked me over. He was a good old Joe, fat, happy, Middle Western. He liked me. "How about showing me around Mexicali tonight, then I'll drive you to Tucson." "Great." We got in the truck and went right back to Mexicali on the road I'd just covered in the bus. But it was worth it to get clear to Tucson. We parked the truck in Calexico, which was quiet now at 11, and went over into Mexicali, and I took him away from tourist trap honky-tonks and led him to the good old saloons of real Mexico, where there were girls at a peso a dance and raw tequila and lots of fun. It was a big night. He danced and enjoyed himself, had his picture taken with a senorita, and drank about 20 shots of tequila. Somewhere during the night we hooked up with a colored guy who was some kind of queer but was awfully funny, and led us to a whorehouse, and then as we were coming out, a Mexican cop relieved him of his snap knife. "That's my third knife this month those bastards stole from me," he said. In the morning, Beaudry, the driver, and I got back to the truck, bleary eyes and hung over, and he wasted no time and drove right straight to Yuma, not going back to El Centro, but on the excellent no-traffic Highway 98, straight 100 miles after hitting 80 at Gray Wells. Soon we were in fact coming into Tucson. We'd eaten a slight lunch outside Yuma, and now he said he was hungry for a good steak. "Only thing is these truck stops ain't got big enough steaks to suit me." "Well, you just park your truck up one of these Tucson supermarkets on the highway, and I'll buy a 2-inch thick T-bone, and we'll stop in the desert and I'll light a fire and broil you the greatest steak of your life." He didn't really believe it, but I did it. Outside the lights of Tucson in a flaming red dusk over the desert, he stopped and I lit a fire with mesquite branches, adding bigger branches and logs later as it got dark. And when the coals were hot, I tried to hold the steak over them with a spit, but the spit burned, so I just fried the huge steaks in their own fat in my lovely new pot pan cover and handed him my jackknife, and he went to it and said, wow, that is the best steak I ever ate." I'd also bought milk, and we had just steak and milk, a great protein feast, squatting there in the sand as highway cars zipped by our little red fire. "Where'd you learn to do all these funny things?" he laughed. "And you know I say funny, but there's something so darned sensible about 'em. Here I am killing myself driving this rig back and forth from Ohio to L.A., and I make more money than you ever had in your whole life as a hobo, but you're the one who enjoys life, and not only that, but you do it without working or a whole lot of money. Now who's smart, you or me?" And he had a nice home in Ohio with wife, daughter, Christmas tree, 2 cars, garage, lawnmower, but he couldn't enjoy any of it because he really wasn't free. It was sadly true. It didn't mean I was a better man than he was, however. He was a great man, and I liked him, and he liked me, and said, "Well, I'll tell you. Supposing I drive you all the way to Ohio." "Wow, great. That'll take me just about home. I'm going south of there to North Carolina." "I was hesitating at first on account of them Markle insurance men. See if they catch you riding with me, I'll lose my job." "Oh, hell. And ain't that something typical?" "It sure is, but I'll tell you something. After this steak you made for me, even though I paid for it, but you cooked it, and here you are washing your dishes in sand. I'll just have to tell them to stick the job up their ass, because now you're my friend and I got a right to give my friend a ride." "Okay," I said, "and I'll pray we don't get stopped by no Markle insurance men." "Good chance of that, because it's Saturday now, and we'll be in Springfield, Ohio, at about dawn Tuesday if I push this rig, and it's their weekend off, more or less." And did he ever push that rig? From that desert in Arizona, he roared on up to New Mexico, took the cut through Las Cruces up to Alamogordo, where the atom bomb was first blasted, and where I had a strange vision as we drove along, seeing in the clouds above the Alamogordo Mountains the words as if imprinted in the sky, "This is the impossibility of the existence of anything," which was a strange place for that strange true vision. And then he batted on through the beautiful Atascadero Indian country in the uphills of New Mexico, beautiful green valleys and pines and New England-like rolling meadows, and then down to Oklahoma. At outside Bowie, Arizona, we'd had a short nap at dawn, he in the truck, me in my bag in the cold red clay, with just stars, blazing silence overhead, and a distant coyote. In no time at all, he was going up through Arkansas and eating it up in one afternoon, and then Missouri and St. Louis, and finally on Monday night bashing across Illinois and Indiana and into old snowy Ohio with all the cute Christmas lights making my heart joy in the windows of old farms. Wow, I thought. All the way from the warm arms of the senoritas of Mexicali to the Christmas snows of Ohio in one fast ride. He had a radio on his dashboard and played it booming all the way, too. We didn't talk much. He just yelled once in a while, telling an anecdote, and had such a loud voice that he actually pierced my eardrum, the left one, and made it hurt, made me jump 2 feet in my seat. He was great. We had a lot of good meals, too, en route, in various favorite truck stops of his, one in Oklahoma where we had roast pork and yams worthy of my mother's own kitchen. We ate and ate. He was always hungry. In fact, so was I. It was winter cold now, and Christmas was on the fields, and food was good. In Independence, Missouri, we made our only stop to sleep in a room, in a hotel at almost $5 apiece, which was robbery, but he needed the sleep, and I couldn't wait in the below-zero truck. When I woke up in the morning on Monday, I looked out and saw all the eager young men in business suits going to work in insurance offices, hoping to be big hairy Trumans someday. By Tuesday dawn, he let me off in downtown Springfield, Ohio, in a deep cold wave, and we said goodbye just a little sadly. I went to a lunch cart, drank tea, figured my budget, went to a hotel, and had one good exhausted sleep. Then I bought a bus ticket to Rocky Mount, as it was impossible to hitchhike from Ohio to North Carolina in all that winter mountain country through the Blue Ridge and all. But I got impatient and decided to hitchhike anyway and asked the bus to stop on the outskirts and walked back to the bus station to cash my ticket. They wouldn't give me the money. The upshot of my insane impatience was that I had to wait 8 more hours for the next slow bus to Charleston, West Virginia. I started hitchhiking out of Springfield, figuring to catch the bus in a town farther down, just for fun, and froze my feet and hands standing in dismal country roads in freezing dusk. One good ride took me to a little town, and there I just waited around the tiny telegraph office which served as a station till my bus arrived. Then it was a crowded bus going slowly over the mountains all night long, and in the dawn the laborious climb over the Blue Ridge with beautiful timbered country in the snow. Then after a whole day of stopping and starting, down out of the mountains into Mount Airy, and finally after ages Raleigh, where I transferred to my local bus and instructed the driver to let me off at the country road that wound 3 miles through the piney woods to my mother's house in Big Easenburg Woods, which is a country crossroad outside Rocky Mount. He let me off at about 8 p.m., and I walked the 3 miles in silent, freezing Carolina road of moon, watching a jet plane overhead, her stream drifting across the face of the moon and bisecting the snow circle. It was beautiful to be back east in the snow at Christmas time, the little lights in occasional farm windows, the quiet woods, the piney barrens so naked and drear, the railroad track that ran off into the gray-blue woods toward my dream. At 9 o'clock I was stomping with full pack across my mother's yard, and there she was at the white-tiled sink in the kitchen, washing her dishes, with a rueful expression waiting for me. I was late, worried I'd never even make it, and probably thinking, poor Raymond, why does he always have to hitchhike and worry me to death? Why isn't he like other men? And I thought of Jaffy as I stood there in the cold yard looking at her. Why is he so mad about white-tiled sinks and kitchen machinery, he calls it? People have good hearts whether or not they live like Dharma Bums. Compassion is the heart of Buddhism. Behind the house was a great pine forest where I would spend all that winter and spring meditating under the trees and finding out by myself the truth of all things. I was very happy. I walked around the house and looked at the Christmas tree in the window. 100 yards down the road, the 2 country stores made a bright, warm scene in the otherwise bleak wooded void. I went to the doghouse and found old Bob trembling and snorting in the cold. He whimpered, glad to see me. I unleashed him, and he yipped and leaped around and came into the house with me, where I embraced my mother in the warm kitchen, and my sister and brother-in-law came out of the parlor and greeted me, and my little nephew Lou, too, and I was home again. Chapter 19. They all wanted me to sleep on the couch in the parlor by the comfortable oil-burning stove, but I insisted on making my room, as before, on the back porch with its 6 windows looking out on the winter-barren cotton field and the pine woods beyond. Leaving all the windows open and stretching my good old sleeping bag on the couch, there to sleep the pure sleep of winter nights, with my head buried inside the smooth nylon duck-down warmth. After they'd gone to bed, I put on my jacket and my earmuff cap and railroad gloves, and over all that my nylon poncho, and strode out in the cotton field moonlight like a shroudy monk. The ground was covered with moonlit frost. The old cemetery down the road gleamed in the frost. The roofs of nearby farmhouses were like white panels of snow. I went through the cotton field rows, followed by Bob, a big bird dog, and little Sandy, who belonged to the joiners down the road, and a few other stray dogs. All dogs love me. And came to the edge of the forest. In there, the previous spring, I'd worn out a little path going to meditate under a favorite baby pine. The path was still there. My official entrance to the forest was still there, this being 2 evenly spaced young pines making kind of gateposts. I always bowed there and clasped my hands and thanked Avalokitesvara for the privilege of the wood. Then I went in, led Moon-White Bob direct to my pine, where my old bed of straw was still at the foot of the tree. I arranged my cape and legs and sat to meditate. The dogs meditated on their paws. We were all absolutely quiet. The entire moony countryside was frosty silent, not even the little tick of rabbits or coons anywhere. An absolute cold, blessed silence. Maybe a dog barking 5 miles away toward Sandy Cross. Just the faintest sound of big trucks rolling out the night on 301, about 12 miles away, and of course the distant occasional diesel Bach of the Atlantic coastline passenger and freight trains going north and south to New York and Florida. A blessed night. I immediately fell into a blank, thoughtless trance wherein it was again revealed to me this thinking has stopped. And I sighed, because I didn't have to think any more, and felt my whole body sink into a blessedness surely to be believed, completely relaxed and at peace with all the ephemeral world of dream and dreamer and the dreaming itself. All kinds of thoughts, too, like, one man practicing kindness in the wilderness is worth all the temples this world pulls. And I reached out and stroked old Bob, who looked at me satisfied. All living and dying things like these dogs and me, coming and going without any duration or self-substance. Oh God, and therefore we can't possibly exist. How strange, how worthy, how good for us. What a horror it would have been if the world was real. Because if the world was real, it would be immortal. My nylon poncho protected me from the cold, like a fitted-on tent, and I stayed a long time sitting cross-legged in the winter midnight woods, about an hour. Then I went back to the house, warmed up by the fire in the living room while the others slept, then slipped into my bag on the porch and fell asleep. The following night was Christmas Eve, which I spent with a bottle of wine before the TV enjoying the shows, and the midnight mass from St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York with bishops ministering, and doctrines glistering, and congregations, the priests in their lacy snow vestments before great official altars not half as great as my straw mat beneath a little pine tree, I figured. Then at midnight the breathless little parents, my sister and brother-in-law, laying out the presents under the tree, and more gloriful than all the Gloria in Excelsis Deus of Rome Church and all its attendant bishops. For after all, I thought, Augustine was a spade and Francis my idiot brother. My cat Davy suddenly blessed me, sweet cat, with his arrival on my lap. I took out the Bible and read a little St. Paul by the warm stove and the light of the tree. Let him become a fool that he may become wise. And I thought of good dear Jaffy and wished he was enjoying the Christmas Eve with me. Already are ye filled, says St. Paul. Already are ye become rich. The saints shall judge the world. Then in a burst of beautiful poetry, more beautiful than all the poetry readings of all the San Francisco Renaissances of time, meats for the belly and the belly for meats, but God shall bring to naught both it and them. Yep, I thought, you pay through the nose for short-lived shows. That week I was all alone in the house. My mother had to go to New York for a funeral, and the others worked. Every afternoon I went into the piney woods with my dogs, read, studied, meditated in the warm winter southern sun, and came back and made supper for everybody at dusk. Also, I put up a basket and shot baskets every sundown. At night, after they went to bed, back I went to the woods in starlight or even in rain sometimes with my poncho. The woods received me well. I amused myself writing little Emily Dickinson poems like Light a Fire, Fight a Liar, What's the Difference in Existence? Or A Watermelon Seed Produces a Need, Large and Juicy, Such Autocracy. Let there be blowing out and bliss forevermore, I prayed in the woods at night. I kept making newer and better prayers, and more poems, like When the Snow Came, Not oft the holy snow, so soft the holy bow. And at one point I wrote The Four Inevitabilities. 1, musty books. 2, uninteresting nature. 3, dull existence. 4, blank nirvana, buy that boy. Or I wrote, on dull afternoons when neither Buddhism nor poetry nor wine nor solitude nor basketball would avail my lazy but earnest flesh, Nothing to do, oh pooh, practically blue. One afternoon I watched the ducks in the pig field across the road, and it was Sunday, and the hollering preachers were screaming on the Carolina radio, and I wrote, Imagine blessing all living and dying worms in eternity and the ducks that eat 'em. There's your Sunday school sermon. In a dream I heard the words, Pain, 'tis but a concubine's puff. But in Shakespeare it would say, Ah, by my faith, that bears a frosty sound. Then suddenly, one night after supper, as I was pacing in the cold, windy darkness of the yard, I felt tremendously depressed and threw myself right on the ground and cried, I'm going to die, because there was nothing else to do in the cold loneliness of this harsh, inhospitable earth. And instantly the tender bliss of enlightenment was like milk in my eyelids, and I was warm. I realized that this was the truth Rosie knew now, and all the dead, my dead father and dead brother and dead uncles and cousins and aunts, the truth that is realizable in a dead man's bones and is beyond the tree of Buddha as well as the cross of Jesus. Believe that the world is an ethereal flower and ye live. I knew this. I also knew that I was the worst bum in the world. The diamond light was in my eyes. My cat meowed at the icebox, anxious to see what all the good dear delight was. I fed him. Chapter 20. After a while, my meditations and studies began to bear fruit. It really started late in January. One frosty night in the woods in the dead silence, it seemed I almost heard the words said, Everything is all right forever and forever and forever. I let out a big hoo. 1 o'clock in the morning. The dogs leaped up and exulted. I felt like yelling it to the stars. I clasped my hands and prayed, O wise and serene spirit of awakenerhood, everything's all right forever and forever and forever, and thank you, thank you, thank you, amen. What did I care about the tower of ghouls and sperm and bones and dust? I felt free, and therefore I was free. I suddenly felt the desire to write to Warren Coghlan, who was strong in my thoughts now as I recalled his modesty and general silence among the vain screams of myself and Alva and Jaffe. Yes, Coghlan, it's a shining nowness, and we've done it, carried America like a shining blanket into that brighter nowhere already. It began to get warmer in February, and the ground began to melt a little, and the nights in the woods were milder, my sleeps on the porch more enjoyable. The stars seemed to get wet in the sky, bigger. Under the stars I'd be dozing cross-legged under my tree, and in my half-asleep mind I'd be saying, "Moab? Who is Moab?" And I'd wake up with a burr in my hand, a cotton burr off one of the dogs. So, awake, I'd make thoughts like, it's all different appearances of the same thing. My drowsiness, the burr, Moab, all one ephemeral dream. All belongs to the same emptiness, glory be. Then I'd run these words through my mind to train myself. I am emptiness. I am not different from emptiness. Neither is emptiness different from me. Indeed, emptiness is me. There'd be a puddle of water with a star shining in it. I'd spit in the puddle. The star would be obliterated. I'd say, that star is real? I wasn't exactly unconscious of the fact that I had a good warm fire to return to after these midnight meditations, provided kindly for me by my brother-in-law, who was getting a little sick and tired of my hanging around not working. Once I told him a line from something, about how one grows through suffering. He said, "If you grow through suffering by this time, I ought to be as big as the side of the house." When I'd go to the country store to buy bread and milk, the old boys there sitting around among bamboo poles and molasses barrels would say, "What do you do in those woods?" "Oh, I just go in there to study." "Ain't you kind of old to be a college student?" "Well, I just go in there sometimes and just sleep." But I'd watch them rambling around the fields all day looking for something to do, so their wives would think they were real busy, hard-working men, and they weren't fooling me either. I knew they secretly wanted to go sleep in the woods or just sit and do nothing in the woods, like I wasn't too ashamed to do. They never bothered me. How could I tell them that my knowing was the knowing that the substance of my bones and their bones and the bones of dead men in the earth of rain at night is the common individual substance that is everlastingly tranquil and blissful? Whether they believed it or not makes no difference, too. One night in my rain cape I sat in a regular downpour, and I had a little song to go with the pattering rain on my rubber hood. Raindrops are ecstasy. Raindrops are not different from ecstasy. Neither is ecstasy different from raindrops. Yea, ecstasy is raindrops. Rain on, O cloud. So what did I care what the old tobacco-chewing stick-whittlers at the crossroads store had to say about my mortal eccentricity? We all get to be gum in graves anyway. I even got a little drunk with one of the old men one time, and we went driving around the country roads, and I actually told him how I was sitting out in those woods meditating, and he really rather understood and said he would like to try that if he had time, or if he could get up enough nerve, and had a little rueful envy in his voice. Everybody knows everything. Chapter 21. Spring came after heavy rains that washed everything. Brown puddles were everywhere in moist, sere fields. Strong, warm winds whipped snow-white clouds across the sun and dry air. Golden days with beauteous moon at night, warm, one emboldened frog picking up a croak song at 11 p.m. in Buddha Creek, where I had established my new straw sitting place under a twisted twin tree by a little opening in the pines and a dry stretch of grass and a tiny brook. There, one day, my nephew, little Lou, came with me, and I took an object from the ground and raised it silently, sitting under the tree, and little Lou, facing me, asked, "What's that?" And I said, "That," and made a leveling motion with my hand, saying, "Ta-ta-ta," repeating, "That, it's that." And only when I told him it was a pine cone did he make the imaginary judgment of the word pine cone, for indeed, as it says in the sutra, emptiness is discrimination. And he said, "My head jumped out, and my brain went crooked, and then my eyes started looking like cucumbers, and my hair had a cowlick on it, and the cowlick licked my chin." Then he said, "Why don't I make up a poem?" He wanted to commemorate the moment. "Okay, but make it up right away, just as you go along." "Okay." The pine trees are waving, the wind is trying to whisper something, the birds are saying drit, 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 and the hawks are going hark, hark, hark. Oh-ho, we're in for danger. Why? Hawk, hark, hark, hark. Then what? Hark, hark. Nothing. I puffed on my silent pipe, peace and quiet in my heart. I called my new grove Twin Tree Grove because of the two tree trunks I leaned against that wound around each other, white spruce shining white in the night and showing me from hundreds of feet away where I was heading, although old Bob whitely showed me the way down the dark path. On that path one night I lost my juju beads Jaffe'd given me, but the next day I found them right in the path, figuring the Dharma can't be lost. Nothing can be lost on a well-worn path. There were now early spring mornings with the happy dogs, me forgetting the path of Buddhism and just being glad, looking around at new little birds, not yet summer fat, the dogs yawning and almost swallowing my Dharma, the grass waving, hens chuckling, spring nights, practicing dhyana under a cloudy moon. I'd see the truth. Here, this is it. The world as it is heaven. I'm looking for a heaven outside what there is. It's only this poor, pitiful world that's heaven. Ah, if I could realize, if I could forget myself and devote my meditations to the freeing, the awakening, and the blessedness of all living creatures everywhere, I'd realize what there is ecstasy. Long afternoons, just sitting in the straw until I was tired of thinking nothing and just going to sleep and having little flash dreams, like the strange one I had once of being up in some kind of gray ghostly attic hauling up suitcases of gray meat my mother is handing up, and I'm petulantly complaining, I won't come down again, to do this work of the world. I felt I was a blank being called upon to enjoy the ecstasy of the endless true body. Days tumbled on days. I was in my overalls, didn't comb my hair, didn't shave much, consorted only with dogs and cats. I was living the happy life of childhood again. Meanwhile, I wrote and got an assignment for the coming summer as a fire lookout for the U.S. Forest Service on Desolation Peak in the High Cascades in Washington State. So I figured to set out for Jaffe's shack in March to be nearer Washington for my summer job. Sunday afternoons my family would want me to go driving with them, but I preferred to stay home alone, and they'd get mad and say, "What's the matter with him anyway?" And I'd hear them argue about the futility of my Buddhism in the kitchen. Then they'd all get in the car and leave, and I'd go in the kitchen and sing, "The tables are empty, everybody's gone over," to the tune of Frank Sinatra's "You're Learning the Blues." I was as nutty as a fruitcake, and happier. Sunday afternoon, then, I'd go to my woods with the dogs and sit and put out my hands, palms up, and accept handfuls of sun boiling over the palms. Nirvana is the moving paw, I'd say, seeing the first thing I saw as I opened my eyes from meditation, that being Bob's paw moving in the grass as he dreamed. Then I'd go back to the house on my clear, pure, well-traveled path, waiting for the night when again I'd see the countless Buddhas hiding in the moonlight air. But my serenity was finally disturbed by a curious argument with my brother-in-law. He began to resent my unshackling Bob the dog and taking him in the woods with me. "I've got too much money invested in that dog to untie him from his chain." I said, "How would you like to be tied to a chain and cry all day like the dog?" He replied, "It doesn't bother me." And my sister said, "And I don't care." I got so mad I stomped off into the woods, it was a Sunday afternoon, and resolved to sit there without food till midnight and come back and pack my things in the night and leave. But in a few hours my mother was calling me from the back porch to supper. I wouldn't come. Finally, little Lou came out to my tree and begged me to come back. I had frogs in the little brook that kept croaking at the oddest times, interrupting my meditations as if by design. Once at high noon a frog croaked 3 times and was silent the rest of the day, as though expounding me the triple vehicle. Now my frog croaked once. I felt it was a signal, meaning the one vehicle of compassion, and went back determined to overlook the whole thing, even my pity about the dog. What a sad and bootless dream. In the woods again that night, fingering the juju beads, I went through curious prayers like these. My pride is hurt, that is emptiness. My business is with the Dharma, that is emptiness. I'm proud of my kindness to animals, that is emptiness. My conception of the chain, that is emptiness. Ananda's pity, even that is emptiness. Perhaps if some old Zen master had been on the scene, he would have gone out and kicked the dog on his chain to give everybody a sudden shot of awakening. My pain was in getting rid of the conception of people and dogs anyway, and of myself. I was hurting deep inside from the sad business of trying to deny what was. In any case, it was a tender little drama in the Sunday countryside. Raymond doesn't want the dog chained. But then, suddenly under the tree at night, I had the astonishing idea, everything is empty but awake. Things are empty in time and space and mind. I figured it all out, and the next day, feeling very exhilarated, I felt the time had come to explain everything to my family. They laughed more than anything else. But listen, no, look, it's simple. Let me lay it out as simple and concise as I can. All things are empty, aren't they? What do you mean, empty? I'm holding this orange in my hand, ain't I? It's empty. Everything's empty. Things come, but to go, all things made have to be unmade, and they'll have to be unmade simply because they were made. Nobody would buy even that. You and your Buddha, why don't you stick to the religion you were born with, my mother and sister said. Everything's gone, already come and gone, I yelled. Ah, stomping around, coming back. And things are empty because they appear, don't they? You see them, but they're made up of atoms that can't be measured or weighed or taken hold of. Even the dumb scientists know that now. There isn't any finding of the farthest atom, so-called. Things are just empty arrangements of something that seems solid appearing in the space. They ain't either big or small, near or far, true or false. They're ghosts, pure and simple. Ghostses, yelled little Lou, amazed. He really agreed with me, but he was afraid of my insistence on ghostses. Look, said my brother-in-law, if things were empty, how could I feel this orange? In fact, taste it and swallow it. Answer me that one. Your mind makes out the orange by seeing it, hearing it, touching it, smelling it, tasting it, and thinking about it. But without this mind, you call it, the orange would not be seen or heard or smelled or tasted or even mentally noticed. It's actually that orange depending on your mind to exist. Don't you see that? By itself, it's a no thing. It's really mental. It's seen only of your mind. In other words, it's empty and awake. Well, if that's so, I still don't care. All enthusiastic, I went back to the woods that night and thought, what does it mean that I am in this endless universe, thinking that I'm a man sitting under the stars on the terrace of the earth, but actually empty and awake throughout the emptiness and awakeness of everything? It means that I'm empty and awake, that I know I'm empty, awake, and that there's no difference between me and anything else. In other words, it means that I've become the same as everything else. It means I've become a Buddha. I really felt that and believed it, and exulted to think what I had to tell Jaffe now when I got back to California. At least he'll listen, I pouted. I felt great compassion for the trees because we were the same thing. I petted the dogs who didn't argue with me ever. All dogs love God. They're wiser than their masters. I told that to the dogs, too. They listened to me, perking up their ears and licking my face. They didn't care one way or the other as long as I was there. St. Raymond of the Dogs is who I was that year, if no one or nothing else. Sometimes in the woods I'd just sit and stare at things themselves, trying to divine the secret of existence anyway. I'd stare at the holy yellow long bowing weeds that faced my grass sit-mat of Tathagata seat of purity, as they pointed in all directions and hairily conversed as the winds dictated ta-ta-ta, in gossip groups with some lone weeds proud to show off on the side, or sick ones and half-dead falling ones, the whole congregation of living weedhood in the wind suddenly ringing like bells and jumping to get excited and all made of yellow stuff and sticking to the ground. And I'd think, this is it. Rop, 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 I'd yell at the weeds, and they'd show windward pointing intelligent reachers to indicate and flail and finagle. Some rooted in blossom imagination, earth-moist perturbation idea that had karmicized their very root and stem. It was eerie. I'd fall asleep and dream the words, by this teaching the earth came to an end, and I'd dream of my ma, nodding solemnly with her whole head, oomph, and eyes closed. What did I care about all the irking hurts and tedious ronks of the world? The human bones are but vain lines dawdling, the whole universe a blank mold of stars. I am Bhikkhu Blankrat, I dreamed. What did I care about the squawk of the very little self which wanders everywhere? I was dealing in outblownness, cut-offness, snipped, blown-outness, put-outness, turned-offness, nothing-happensness, goneness, gone-outness, the snapped link, link, vana, snap. The dust of my thoughts collected into a globe, I thought, in this ageless solitude, I thought, and really smiled, because I was seeing the white light everywhere, everything at last. The warm wind made the pines talk deep one night when I began to experience what is called samapati, which in Sanskrit means transcendental visits. I'd got a little drowsy in the mind, but was somehow physically wide awake, sitting erect under my tree, when suddenly I saw flowers, pink worlds of walls between them, salmon pink, in the shh of silent woods. Obtaining nirvana is like locating silence. And I saw an ancient vision of Dipankara Buddha, who was the Buddha who never said anything. Dipankara is a vast snowy pyramid Buddha with bushy wild black eyebrows like John L. Lewis, and a terrible stare, all in an old location, an ancient snowy field like Alban. "A new field," had yelled the Negro preacher woman, the whole vision making my hair rise. I remember the strange magic final cry that it evoked in me, whatever it means. Kalial-color. It, the vision, was devoid of any sensation of I being myself. It was pure egolessness, just simply wild ethereal activities devoid of any wrong predicates, devoid of effort, devoid of mistake. Everything's all right, I thought. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, and we're here forever in one form or another, which is empty. What the dead have accomplished, this rich silent hush of the pure awakened land. I felt like crying out over the woods and rooftops of North Carolina, announcing the glorious and simple truth. Then I said, "I've got my full rucksack pack and it's spring. I'm going to go southwest to the dry land, to the long lone land of Texas and Chihuahua and the gay streets of Mexico night, music coming out of doors, girls, wine, weed, wild hats, viva! What does it matter? Like the ants that have nothing to do but dig all day, I have nothing to do but do what I want and be kind and remain nevertheless uninfluenced by imaginary judgments and pray for the light. Sitting in my Buddha arbor, therefore, in that Kalial-color wall of flowers, pink and red and ivory white, among aviaries of magic transcendent birds, recognizing my awakening mind with sweet weird cries, the pathless lark, in the ethereal perfume, mysteriously ancient, the bliss of the Buddha fields, I saw that my life was a vast, glowing empty page, and I could do anything I wanted. A strange thing happened the next day to illustrate the true power I had gained from these magic visions. My mother had been coughing for 5 days, and her nose was running, and now her throat was beginning to hurt so much that her coughs were painful and sounded dangerous to me. I decided to go into a deep trance and hypnotize myself, reminding myself all is empty and awake, to investigate the cause and cure of my mother's illness. Instantly, in my closed eyes, I saw a vision of a brandy bottle, which then I saw to be heat rubbing medicine, and on top of that, superimposed like a movie fade-in, I saw a distinct picture of little white flowers, round, with small petals. I instantly got up. It was midnight. My mother was coughing in her bed, and I went and took several bowls of bachelor's buttons my sister had arranged around the house the week before, and I set them outside. Then I took some heat out of the medicine cabinet and told my mother to rub it on her neck. The next day her cough was gone. Later on, after I was gone hitchhiking west, a nurse friend of ours heard the story and said, "Yes, it sounds like an allergy to the flowers." During this vision and this action, I knew perfectly clearly that people get sick by utilizing physical opportunities to punish themselves because of their self-regulating God nature, or Buddha nature, or Allah nature, or any name you want to give God. And everything worked automatically that way. This was my first and last miracle, because I was afraid of getting too interested in this and becoming vain. I was a little scared, too, of all the responsibility. Everybody in the family heard of my vision and what I did, but they didn't seem to think much of it. In fact, I didn't either. And that was right. I was very rich now, a super-myriad trillionaire in samapati transcendental graces, because of good humble karma. Maybe because I had pitied the dog and forgiven men. But I knew now that I was a bliss heir, that the final sin, the worst, is righteousness. So I would shut up and just hit the road and go see Jaffe. "Don't let the blues make you bad," sings Frank Sinatra. On my final night in the woods, the eve of my departure by thumb, I heard the word star-body concerning how things don't have to be made to disappear but to awake to their supremely pure true body and star-body. I saw there was nothing to do because nothing ever happened. Nothing ever would happen. All things were empty light. So I took off well fortified with my pack, kissing my mother goodbye. She had paid $5 to have brand-new thick rubber soles with cleats put on the bottom of my old boots, and now I was all set for a summer working in the mountains. Our old country store friend, Buddy Tom, a character in his own right, took me in his vehicle out to Highway 64, and there we waved goodbye, and I started hitching 3,000 miles back to California. I would be home again the next Christmas. Chapter 22. Meanwhile, Jaffe was waiting for me in his nice little shack in Corte Madera, California. He was settled in Sean Monahan's hermitage, a wooden cabin built behind a cypress windrow on a steep little grassy hill also covered with eucalyptus and pine, behind Sean's main house. The shack had been built by an old man to die in years ago. It was well built. I was invited to go live there as long as I wanted, rent-free. The shack had been made habitable after years as a wreck by Sean Monahan's brother-in-law, Whitey Jones, a good young carpenter who had put in burlap over the wood walls and a good wood stove and a kerosene lamp, and then never lived in it, having to go to work out of town. So Jaffe'd moved in to finish his studies and live the good solitary life. If anybody wanted to go see him, it was a steep climb. On the floor were woven grass mats, and Jaffe said in a letter, "I sit and smoke a pipe and drink tea and hear the wind beat the slender eucalyptus limbs like whips and the cypress windrow roars." He'd stay there until May 15th, his sailing date for Japan, where he had been invited by an American foundation to stay in a monastery and study under a master. "Meanwhile," wrote Jaffe, "come share a wild man's dark cabin with wine and weekend girls and good pots of food and wood fire heat. Monahan will give us grocery bucks to fall a few trees in his big yard and buck and split 'em out for firewood, and I'll teach you all about logging." During that winter, Jaffe had hitchhiked up to his home country in the northwest, up through Portland in snow, farther up to the Blue Ice Glacier country, finally northern Washington on the farm of a friend in the Nooksack Valley, a week in a berry picker's split-shake cabin, and a few climbs around. The names, like Nooksack and Mount Baker National Forest, excited in my mind a beautiful crystal vision of snow and ice and pines in the far north of my childhood dreams. But I was standing on the very hot April road of North Carolina waiting for my first ride, which came very soon from a young high school kid who took me to a country town called Nashville, where I broiled in the sun a half hour till I got a ride from a taciturn but kindly naval officer who drove me clear to Greenville, South Carolina. After that whole winter and early spring of incredible peace sleeping on my porch and resting in my woods, the stint of hitchhiking was harder than ever and more like hell than ever. In Greenville, in fact, I walked 3 miles in the burning sun for nothing, lost in the maze of downtown back streets, looking for a certain highway, and at one point passed a kind of forge where colored men were all black and sweaty and covered with coal, and I cried, "I'm suddenly in hell again," as I felt the blast of heat. But it began to rain on the road, and few rides took me into the rainy night of Georgia, where I rested sitting on my pack under the overhanging sidewalk roofs of old hardware stores and drank a half pint of wine. A rainy night, no rides. When the Greyhound bus came, I hailed it down and rode to Gainesville. In Gainesville, I thought I'd sleep by the railroad tracks a while, but they were about a mile away. And just as I thought of sleeping in the yard, a local crew came out to switch and saw me, so I retired to an empty lot by the tracks, but the cop car kept circling around, using its spot, had probably heard of me from the railroad men, probably not. So I gave it up, mosquitoes anyway, and went back to town and stood waiting for a ride in the bright lights by the luncheonettes of downtown, the cops seeing me plainly and therefore not searching for me or worrying about me. But no ride, and dawn coming, so I slept in a $4 room in a hotel and showered and rested well. But what feelings of homelessness and bleak, again, as the Christmas trip east. All I had to be really proud of were my fine new thick-soled work shoes and my full pack. In the morning, after breakfast in a dismal Georgia restaurant with revolving fans on the ceiling and mucho flies, I went out on the broiling highway and got a ride from a truck driver to Flowery Branch, Georgia, then a few spot rides on through Atlanta to the other side at another small town called Stonewall, where I was picked up by a big fat Southerner with a broad-brimmed hat who reeked of whiskey and kept telling jokes and turning to look at me to see if I laughed, meanwhile sending the car spurting into the soft shoulders and leaving big clouds of dust behind us, so that long before he reached his destination I begged off and said I wanted to get off to eat. "Heck, boy, I'll eat with you and drive you on." He was drunk and he drove very fast. "Well, I gotta go to the toilet," I said, trailing off my voice. The experience had bugged me, so I decided, the hell with hitchhiking. I've got enough money to take a bus to El Paso, and from there I'll hop Southern Pacific freights and be 10 times safer. Besides, the thought of being all the way out in El Paso, Texas, in that dry southwest of clear blue skies and endless desert land to sleep in, no cops, made up my mind. I was anxious to get out of the South, out of Chain Gang, Georgia. The bus came at 4 o'clock, and we were at Birmingham, Alabama, in the middle of the night, where I waited on a bench for my next bus, trying to sleep on my arms on my rucksack, but kept waking up to see the pale ghosts of American bus stations wandering around. In fact, one woman streamed by like a wisp of smoke. I was definitely certain she didn't exist for sure. On her face, the phantasmal belief in what she was doing. On my face, for that matter, too. After Birmingham, it was soon Louisiana, and then East Texas oil fields, then Dallas, then a long day's ride in a bus crowded with servicemen across the long, immense waste of Texas, to the ends of it, El Paso, arriving at midnight. By now, I being so exhausted, all I wanted to do was sleep. But I didn't go to a hotel. I had to watch my money now, and instead I just hauled my pack to my back and walked straight for the railroad yards to stretch my bag out somewhere behind the tracks. It was then, that night, that I realized the dream that had made me want to buy the pack. It was a beautiful night and the most beautiful sleep of my life. First I went to the yards and walked through, warily, behind lines of boxcars, and got out to the west end of the yard, but kept going, because suddenly I saw in the dark there was indeed a lot of desert land out there. I could see rocks, dry bushes, imminent mountains of them faintly in the starlight. Why hang around viaducts and tracks, I reasoned, when all I gotta do is exert a little footwork and I'll be safe out of reach of all yard cops and bums too, for that matter. I just kept walking along the main-line track for a few miles, and soon I was in the open desert mountain country. My thick boots walked well on the ties and rocks. It was now about 1 a.m. I longed to sleep off the long trip from Carolina. Finally, I saw a mountain to the right I liked, after passing a long valley with many lights in it, distinctly a penitentiary or prison. "Stay away from that yard, son," I thought. I went up a dry arroyo, and in the starlight the sand and rocks were white. I climbed and climbed. Suddenly I was exhilarated to realize I was completely alone and safe, and nobody was going to wake me up all night long. What an amazing revelation. And I had everything I needed right on my back. I'd put fresh bus station water in my molybdenum bottle before leaving. I climbed up the arroyo, so finally when I turned and looked back I could see all of Mexico, all of Chihuahua, the entire sand-glittering desert of it, under a late-sinking moon that was huge and bright just over the Chihuahua Mountains. The Southern Pacific rails ran right along parallel to the Rio Grande River outside of El Paso, so from where I was on the American side, I could see right down to the river itself separating the two borders. The sand in the arroyo was soft as silk. I spread my sleeping bag on it and took off my shoes, and had a slug of water and lit my pipe and crossed my legs and felt glad. Not a sound. It was still winter in the desert. Far off, just the sound of the yards, where they were kicking cuts of cars with a great sploum, waking up all El Paso, but not me. All I had for companionship was that moon of Chihuahua sinking lower and lower as I looked, losing its white light and getting more and more yellow butter. Yet when I turned in to sleep it was bright as a lamp in my face, and I had to turn my face away to sleep. In keeping with my naming of little spots with personal names, I called this spot Apache Gulch. I slept well indeed. In the morning, I discovered a rattlesnake trail in the sand, but that might have been from the summer before. There were very few boot marks, and those were hunter's boots. The sky was flawlessly blue in the morning, the sun hot, plenty of little dry wood to light a breakfast fire. I had cans of pork and beans in my spacious pack. I had a royal breakfast. The problem now was water, though, as I drank it all and the sun was hot and I got thirsty. I climbed up the arroyo, investigating it further, and came to the end of it, a solid wall of rock, and at the foot of it even deeper, softer sand than that of the night before. I decided to camp there that night, after a pleasant day spent in old Juarez, enjoying the church and streets and food of Mexico. For a while I contemplated leaving my pack hidden among rocks, but the chances were slim, yet possible, that some old hobo or hunter would come along and find it. So I hauled it on my back and went down the arroyo to the rails again and walked back 3 miles into El Paso and left the pack in a 25-cent locker in the railroad station. Then I walked through the city and out to the border gate and crossed over for 2 pennies. It turned out to be an insane day, starting sanely enough in the Church of Mary Guadalupe, and a saunter in the Indian markets and resting on park benches among the gay, childlike Mexicans. But later the bars and a few too many to drink, yelling at old mustachioed Mexican peons, "Todas las granas de arena del desierto de Chihuahua son vacuidad." And finally I ran into a bunch of evil Mexican Apaches of some kind, who took me to their dripping stone pad and turned me on by candlelight and invited their friends, and it was all a lot of shadowy heads by candlelight and smoke. In fact, I got sick of it and remembered my perfect white sand gulch and the place where I would sleep tonight, and I excused myself. But they didn't want me to leave. One of them stole a few things from my bag of purchases, but I didn't care. One of the Mexican boys was queer and had fallen in love with me and wanted to go to California with me. It was night now in Juarez. All the nightclubs were wailing away. We went for a short beer in one nightclub, which was exclusively Negro soldiers sprawling around with senoritas in their laps, a mad bar, with rock and roll on the jukebox, a regular paradise. The Mexican kid wanted me to go down alleys and go "Sst" and tell American boys that I knew where there were some girls. "Then I bring them to my room. Sst, no girls," said the Mexican kid. The only place I could shake him was at the border gate. We waved goodbye. But it was the evil city, and I had my virtuous desert waiting for me. I walked anxiously over the border and through El Paso and out to the railroad station, got my bag out, heaved a big sigh, and went right on down those 3 miles to the arroyo, which was easy to re-recognize in the moonlight. And on up, my feet making that lonely thwap-thwap of Jaffe's boots. And I realized I had indeed learned from Jaffe how to cast off the evils of the world and the city and find my true, pure soul, just as long as I had a decent pack on my back. I got back to my camp and spread the sleeping bag and thanked the Lord for all he was giving me. Now the remembrance of the whole long, evil afternoon smoking marijuana with slant-hatted Mexicans in a musty, candlelit room was like a dream, a bad dream, like one of my dreams on the straw mat at Buda Creek, North Carolina. I meditated and prayed. There just isn't any kind of night's sleep in the world that can compare with the night's sleep you get in the desert winter night, providing you're good and warm in a duck-down bag. The silence is so intense that you can hear your own blood roar in your ears, but louder than that by far is the mysterious roar which I always identify with the roaring of the diamond of wisdom, the mysterious roar of silence itself, which is a great shh, reminding you of something you've seemed to have forgotten in the stress of your days since birth. I wished I could explain it to those I loved, to my mother, to Jaffe, but there just weren't any words to describe the nothingness and purity of it. Is there a certain and definite teaching to be given to all living creatures? Was the question probably asked to beetle-browed snowy Dipankara, and his answer was the roaring silence of the diamond. Chapter 23. In the morning, I had to get the show on the road or never get to my protective shack in California. I had about $8 left of the cash I'd brought with me. I went down to the highway and started to hitchhike, hoping for quick luck. A salesman gave me a ride. He said, 360 days out of the year we get bright sunshine here in El Paso, and my wife just bought a clothes dryer. He took me to Las Cruces, New Mexico, And there I walked through the little town, following the highway, and came out on the other end, and saw a big, beautiful old tree, and decided to just lay my pack down and rest anyhow. Since it's a dream already ended, then I'm already in California. Then I've already decided to rest under that tree at noon, which I did on my back, even napping a while pleasantly. Then I got up and walked over the railroad bridge, and just then a man saw me and said, "How would you like to earn $2 an hour helping me move a piano?" I needed the money and said okay. We left my rucksack in his moving storage room and went off in his little truck to a home in the outskirts of Las Cruces, where a lot of nice middle-class people were chatting on the porch. And the man and I got out of the truck with the hand truck and the pads and got the piano out, also a lot of other furniture, then transported it to their new house and got that in, and that was that. 2 hours, he gave me $4, and I went into a truck stop diner and had a royal meal and was all set for that afternoon and night. Just then a car stopped, driven by a big Texan with a sombrero, with a poor Mexican couple, young, in the back seat, the girl carrying an infant, and he offered me a ride all the way to Los Angeles for $10. I said, "I'll give you all I can, which is only $4. "Well, goddamn it, come on anyway." He talked and drove all night straight through Arizona and the California desert, and left me off in Los Angeles a stone's throw from my railroad yards at 9 o'clock in the morning. And the only disaster was the poor little Mexican wife had spilled some baby food on my rucksack on the floor of the car, and I wiped it off angrily. But they had been nice people. In fact, driving through Arizona, I'd explained a little Buddhism to them, specifically karma, reincarnation, and they all seemed pleased to hear the news. "You mean another chance to come back and try again?" asked the poor little Mexican, who was all bandaged from a fight in Juarez the night before. "That's what they say." "Well, goddammit, next time I be born, I hope I ain't who I am now." And the big Texan, if anybody better get another chance, it was him. His stories all night long were about how he slugged so-and-so for such and such. From what he said, he had knocked enough men out to form Coxey's army of avenged phantasmal grievers crawling onto Texas land. But I noticed he was more of a big fibber than anything else, and didn't believe half his stories, and stopped listening at midnight. Now, 9 a.m. in L.A., I walked to the railroad yards, had a cheap breakfast of donuts and coffee in a bar, sitting at the counter chatting with the Indian bartender, who wanted to know what I was doing with the big rucksack. Then I went to the yards and sat in the grass watching them make up the trains. Proud of myself, because I used to be a brakeman, I made the mistake of wandering around the yards with my rucksack on my back, chatting with the switchman, asking about the next local. And suddenly, here came a great big young cop with a gun swinging in a holster on his hip, all done up like on TV, the sheriff of Cochise and Wyatt Earp, and giving me a steely look through dark glasses, orders me out of the yards. So he watches me as I go over the overpass to the highway, standing there arms akimbo. Mad, I went back down the highway and jumped over the railroad fence and lay flat in the grass a while. Then I sat up and chewed grass, keeping low, however, and waited. Soon I heard a highball blow, and I knew what train was ready, and I climbed over cars to my train and jumped on it as it was pulling out, and rode right out of the L.A. yards lying on my back with a grass stem in my mouth, right under the unforgiving gaze of my policeman, who was now arms akimbo for a different reason. In fact, he scratched his head. The local went to Santa Barbara, where again I went to the beach, had a swim and some food over a fine wood fire in the sand, and came back to the yards with plenty of time to catch the Midnight Ghost. The Midnight Ghost is composed mainly of flat cars with truck trailers lashed on them by steel cables. The huge wheels of the trucks are encased in wood blocks. Since I always lay my head down right by those wood blocks, it would be goodbye Ray if there ever was a crash. I figured if it was my destiny to die on the Midnight Ghost, it was my destiny. I figured God had work for me to do yet. The ghost came right on schedule, and I got on a flat car, under a truck, spread out my bag, stuck my shoes under my bald coat for a pillow, and relaxed and sighed. Zoom, we were gone. And now I know why the bums call it the Midnight Ghost, because, exhausted, against all better judgment, I fell fast asleep and only woke up under the glare of the yard office lights in San Luis Obispo. A very dangerous situation. The train had stopped just in the wrong way. But there wasn't a soul in sight around the yard office. It was mid of night. Besides, just then, as I woke up from a perfect dreamless sleep, the highball was going Bach, Bach up front, and we were already pulling out, exactly like ghosts. And I didn't wake up then till almost San Francisco in the morning. I had $1 left, and Gary was waiting for me at the shack. The whole trip had been as swift and enlightening as a dream, and I was back.